Hi Group D, so this is our second session of Thursday, 4th of June. So we began our session by reminding ourselves of our first aim of inquiry. Learning what came before us helps establish our own course in life. So what we talked about really was how we would need to visit the past, so as to really put into context how they lived, what they did, and what it is that we gain from them. And begin by visiting the ancient Greeks and to look at their legacy. So take a moment, guys, to consider what we mean by legacy. This is something we considered in our session. What do we mean by legacy? So what have the Greeks left us? What have we gained and learned from them? This is their legacy, essentially. So I know that you looked at ancient civilizations in terms of power, the control they had, how much land, how many people they controlled. But we'll be looking at something much more important in our coming sessions. We'll be looking at these civilizations in terms of their influence. So how far did the ancient Greeks' influence span across time and space so as to affect us today, so as to influence us today? So we began with a short video paying close attention to the 6 pillars of civilization that you've done previously. So guys, take note of the 6 pillars of Greek civilization while you watch this.
Hey kids, I'm sure by now most of you have heard of a civilization known as ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks were people that lived about 3,500 years ago in what is now southeastern Europe. They had a spectacular rise and then their civilization declined, leading to the Roman Empire. Only in their prime for about 700 years, the Greek civilization had a huge influence on a lot of the stuff in our daily lives and in the lives of people around the world. But before we get into that, let's first talk about what we mean by ancient. By comparison, those of us who live in America have a civilization that's been around for only about 1,000 years, and the United States of America itself has only been a country for less than 250 years. So 3,500 years is a long time ago. Although it was at its peak more than 3 millennia ago, the ancient Greek civilization still lives with us today. Some of the architecture that you see around you, as seen on a lot of our famous government buildings, came from the Greeks. Those columns you're looking at, those were invented in ancient Greece. The 3 main types of Greek columns are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, Corinthian being the fanciest. How'd you like to have the job of carving the top of a Corinthian column by hand? The theater you're used to seeing, in which you sit down and actors come up on stage and perform for you, yup, that came from the Greeks too. They basically invented the play. There's also philosophy, the Olympic Games, lots of great literature, certain types of painting, sculpture, and other art forms. We can thank the Greeks for all of it. A lot of the words that we use in our English language came from the ancient Greeks as well. There are actually more than 150,000 words that we use that came from Greece. Cool words like hyper, meta, phobia, acrobat, fraternity, even the word cemetery, all from the Greeks. The ancient Greeks were definitely a super successful society, largely in part to the type of government they chose to have, the way they lived their lives, the strong military skills they possessed, and the geography of the region where they lived. But let's take a step back. How did the ancient Greeks rise, fall, and what were their lives like? Let's begin with where ancient Greece was. The ancient Greek civilization lay on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, where the current country of Greece is, and extended east across the Aegean Sea, where there's now a country called Turkey. The Greeks sometimes got around by traveling across the Aegean Sea to the islands and city-states that dotted the region. They also set up shop in some parts of what is currently Italy, France, Spain, and even northern Africa. Some of the most famous ancient Greek city-states were Athens, which is still the capital of Greece, as well as Thebes and Sparta. Some of these city-states fought with each other in wars, with names like the Peloponnesian War, which is almost impossible to spell. So when did the Greek civilization start? Historians consider 800 BC to be the beginning of the Greek civilization, which came after the fall of their predecessors, the Mycenaeans. The first period of the Greek civilization is commonly called the Archaic period, archaic being another word for old. And guess what? The word archaic itself is a word that came from the Greeks. During the Archaic period, lots of stuff happened. The Greeks held the first Olympics in 776 BC, and they ran every 4 years after that. Believe it or not, some of the first Olympic athletes actually competed naked. Also during this period, the famous author Homer wrote his Iliad and Odyssey epics, which are still read widely today. During the Archaic period, mathematics really kicked into high gear when Pythagoras came along. He was famous for studying triangles and figuring out how the hypotenuse of a triangle relates to its angles. If you haven't learned any of that yet in school, then it's all Greek to you. This time period was also when the concept of citizens voting for their leaders, known as democracy, was first introduced by Cleisthenes. He also created the first constitution. One person, one vote. Still one of the best ideas the Greeks ever had. During the Archaic period, the ancient Greeks also first demonstrated their skill at war, when Sparta and Messenia faced off from 743 to 724 BC. The next period in ancient Greek history was when they really hit their stride. This was known as the Classical period, which lasted from about 480 BC to 323 BC. If there was a report card for the ancient Greeks during the Classical period, it might read, Theater. Sophocles wrote the first of his plays, and this became a popular form of entertainment. A+. The art of war. The Greeks proved that they had perfected their military might when they fought the Persians and won. A+. Architecture. The Greeks built their most famous building in Athens, the Parthenon. A+. Philosophy. Socrates spread his teachings and Aristotle tutored the future king, Alexander the Great. A+. Governance. Alexander the Great became king and led the Greeks to conquer Egypt and set up the capital of Alexandria. Nice to have a city named after you, don't you think? A++. The final period of the ancient Greek civilization was from 323 BC to 146 BC. This was known as the Greek Hellenistic period. During this time frame, Alexander the Great died and the Roman Empire started to rise. Also during this time period, the great mathematician Euclid published Elements, which became one of the most important mathematical treatises ever. So what was daily life like for them during their 700 years of glory? Let's start with how they set up their homes and communities. Greek homes were joined by a courtyard, where kids could play. Courtyards also had the water well for the family and a religious altar for praying. And you've heard of a man cave? A lot of the ancient Greek homes had their own version of that, which they called an andron, where only the men would hang out. And much like the squares and parks that we have in our towns and cities, ancient Greek cities had centralized plazas where citizens could assemble and exchange goods and ideas. These squares were called agoras. Things were a little different for kids in ancient Greece than they are for American kids today. A lot of the decisions on how to raise children fell to the father. He could decide how well the child was treated and whether or not to give the child a formal or informal education.
So that's schooling thousands of years ago.
Only boys were educated formally, and at age 7, they would start learning math, reading, writing, and often military skills. At 13, they were considered adults. Can you imagine being considered an adult at only 13?
So guys, just a quick note, this is something we discussed in our session. Essentially, life expectancy has risen a great deal over thousands of years. This is with technological advancements, medical health advancements, so healthcare advancements. So essentially, we live on average a lot longer. So we did discuss in our session how that's on average. So of course, there will be exceptions, those people who live slightly longer or those people who live less longer. But on a whole, as an average, life expectancy has risen across the years. So life expectancy as an average was lower at that time. So you would be considered adults at a younger age. So that's so that age has kind of gone up over time with life expectancy increasing. Oops.
When it came to food, the Greeks ate what they grew on their farms. Just like in Greece today, the main staple was olives, which they both ate and used as a skin treatment for women.
At that
Greeks
time,
ate very healthy diets,
which
is maybe why they thrived for so long. No fast food for the Greeks. They ate a lot of bread, which they dipped into olive oil and watered down wine, and consumed mainly fish, vegetables, cheese, and fruits. Clothing was also pretty simple for the Greeks. Men and women mainly wore colored or white tunics, which reached below the knees. Some men would also wear chitons, which was a lighter material and draped over one or both shoulders. When it came to babies, they were mostly naked, as they didn't see the need to clothe them. They saved a lot of money on onesies. Of course, one of the most memorable parts of ancient Greek life, the part that really captures our imagination, were their gods, which they believed resided on the top of Mount Olympus, a 9,500-foot peak that sticks up into the sky above Greece. Hey, if you're going to be a god, Mount Olympus is the place to be. All in all, the ancient Greek civilization has a legacy that lives on in the world. They gave us so much that still defines us today. The Olympics, democratic government, healthy foods, mathematics, and even our alphabet. Not to mention some cool gods and goddesses that arguably led to the superheroes of the future. Thanks for following.
Yeah, guys, just a quick reminder of the 6 pillars of civilization, which a lot of you were able to recall. I was quite impressed with that. Religion. That's an organized form of belief when a large group of people believe something quite similar. So that's religion. Art, when we express ourselves through painting, sculpture, and even what we do, drama. Government, how's the country governed? How's it led? And writing, so language, the written arts, and cities. So what are the main centers of that civilization? The cities. How do they trade? What's their culture? What do they eat? They wear. Their social culture, their social structure. Sorry. What different groups of people lived in that civilization? So let's look at those 6 pillars in terms of the Greeks. Now quickly review them, guys. 6 ways the ancient Greeks changed the world. So ancient Greece was one of the first important civilizations in Europe. So it had a tremendous influence on Western culture, and it spanned across 3 eras. So here are some of the ways that ancient Greeks changed the world. Art, guys. It still inspires paintings today. Painters still depict Greek mythology in their paintings. So government. Guys, this is something really impressive, actually. There are still parts of the world who haven't quite got there with democracy, yet they practiced this thousands of years ago in Greece. This is quite progressive. So you were able to vote, voice your opinion in assembly, and they also had provinces, localized government, the answer to a central government in Athens. This is all very progressive and well thought through for a government thousands of years ago. So it's part of their success and influence. And is it still followed today? Yeah. What have we gained? We've actually moved forward since women too have the vote. So architecture, there's still buildings like this one in the US, and that's made using the model of the Acropolis in Athens. And the Olympics, guys, that comes from ancient Greece. So literature, we still have literature that we read, which comes from ancient Greece. For example, there's many Greek thinkers, like Hippocrates, who was a Greek thinker, came up with the Hippocratic Oath for doctors, a promise that they will help people, and it's still used all over the world thousands of years later today. The doctors still all over the world use that, take that Hippocratic Oath, which is that we will help people. So guys, taking us to our first task. So guys, just imagine you live in ancient Greece and you want people to visit. So invite people. Mention the 6 categories we looked at. Tell them, come and visit us during our great Olympics, the great sports all around the world, so renowned all over the world. Persuade them. You can even visit our wonderful agoras, so like the Marcuses, where you love the great food we have here. So really go about persuading them. You can divide your page into 3, like the way I've done, or in any way you like. You can make it on a slide or on paper and take a picture of it and submit that. So guys, add pictures and drawings to your leaflet. One of you mentioned if you can do that, that would be great, because it will make someone want to read it, and it'll also make your leaflet much more readable, much more interesting, and easier to understand.